Hey everybody, it's 9 o'clock and 9 o'clock is with me, Father Warner. We are in Wednesday within the Easter Octave. Remember, I'm doing gospel texts in the season of Eastertide. So we're looking at Luke chapter 24, verse 13 to 35. Now, this is an extremely long text. So I recommend that you pause the video, you read the text because it is a beautiful text, and then you get back to the explanation. But for those of you who'd also like to do a bit of study on the first reading on Acts chapter 3 verse 1 to 10, I recommend you go to the description box of this video and look at the links to both the blog as well as the YouTube video. But I've entitled today's teaching, Are You Still Walking to Emmaus? Are you still walking to Emmaus? So let me go straight away to the explanation of this text. Now, the Gospel of Luke begins with the women at the tomb and an Easter proclamation by the angels, which ironically began with a chastisement. You know, the women have come to the tomb with spices. Yes, they love the Lord. They loved him enough to bring spices to embalm a dead body. Yet, all along Jesus said that he would rise again, and the women had not understood or believed entirely. The angel must have been, I think, a bit cross when he said, "Why do you look for the living among the dead?" You see, what is interesting is that unlike the other Gospels, the women have not encountered the risen Christ in the flesh. They are simply told he is risen. They just have the word of the angel, and ironically, they believe. Now, while in all the other Gospels, it is Christ who appears first to Mary Magdalene or to the women, here in the Gospel of Luke, Christ does not appear to them first, but rather he appears to two disciples on the road to Emmaus. Now, it's a bit ironic when you come to think about it, because the Gospel of Luke is always touted as the Gospel for women. In any case, these men are certainly not models of faith. Hardly had Easter Sunday dawned than these two disciples folded their tents. You see, they were heading presumably to their home in Emmaus. We are told it was a 7-mile journey by foot. We know that because scripture tells us it was 7 miles from Jerusalem to Emmaus. Now, while this was not a long journey, I think it was a very burdensome one for these two disciples. You know, some walks are longer than others, not because of the miles we have to traverse, but I think because of the burden we carry while we walk. So, like it or not, these two disciples seem to have abandoned the cause, if not lost their way. And so lost were they that their paths took them in the direction of Emmaus, which was west of Jerusalem, the path of the setting sun. They were walking down into darkness. In many ways, Jesus did not meet their expectations. For they say in the text, they say, our hope was that he was the one to redeem Israel. The disciples, in that sense, reflect many men and women of faith whose hope is lost because their expectations of Jesus are not met. And now, as they walked away, the disciples begin discussing, or as the Greek word antibalete suggests, they were not just discussing, they were putting together the pieces as one would do in a forensic investigation. Now, Jesus has a habit of interrupting our lives, and I'm glad he does. He does that for a very good reason. So Jesus interrupts this conversation. What are you discussing? You know, his simple question was met with sarcasm. Are you the only stranger in Jerusalem who does not know these things that have taken place there in these days? There's sarcasm in their voice. Interestingly, and unlike many of us on Twitter, I think Jesus does not take the bait. Yeah, when somebody throws you sarcasm on Twitter, don't take the bait. But rather, Jesus begins a very therapeutic discussion, which ironically begins by calling out the disciples as foolish. Look at the text. He actually says, "You foolish men." Now, it's not a great way to put your point across or to begin presenting your point of view, but oddly, foolish worked for these two. So enamored were they by this stranger and his teaching that they urged him strongly, these are words of scripture, urged him strongly to stay with them, to abide with them. You know, the Greek translation of those words, urged him strongly, translates as compels or to twist one arm. Now, Jesus must have really been playing it hard to get, yet they urged him strongly because his words, as we know, caused their hearts to burn within them. The words of Jesus, in that sense, my dear friends, are addictive if we but listen to it. The words of Jesus are addictive if but preachers break his word. You see, having prevailed upon Jesus to stay, they then settle down to a meal. It seems Jesus truly ate his way through the Gospels, because all through the Gospels you see every time he's sitting down to a meal, once again he's at a meal. But unknown to them, they are making history, these two disciples, because these two disciples are sitting down to the first meal with Jesus after his resurrection. He breaks the bread, having already broken the word. Notice that the liturgy at Mass follows the same pattern. The word is broken first at the table of the word, and then the bread is broken at the table of the bread. Note, every Mass, you and I, my dear friends, are fed from two tables. We are nourished in our hearts and in our bodies. So you can't stroll into Mass after the readings have begun and just be fed with his body at communion. It's an incomplete feeding. We are nourished at the word of the table and the word of the word at the lectern and the word at the altar. We are nourished at both places so that we may go out and nourish others. Also note this: having broken the bread, Jesus vanishes. He vanishes, creating space for us to do what ought to happen naturally. For us then to go out and proclaim what we have experienced, what we have received. You know, the disciples do not wait for their retirement to go out and become evangelists. The hour of their conversion was the hour of their proclamation. That same hour they turned to Jerusalem, back in the direction now of in the east, because Jerusalem is in the east, back in the direction of the rising sun, no longer walking into darkness, no longer walking into the west. They are walking back to Jerusalem, towards the light, where the sun rises. And this time they are not downcast. This time there is no debate or dissection of the events that have taken place. This time there is faith, this time there is clarity, this time there is certainty. And they make known to the disciples what had happened at the breaking of the bread. You know, my dear friends, each day at Mass, the word and the bread is broken. The Mass ends with the words, "The Mass is ended. Go and proclaim the gospel. Go and announce the gospel." I want to ask you this: where do our feet really take us after Mass? To Jerusalem or to Emmaus? Thank you for joining me. If you like this reflection, leave me a comment. Tell me what you thought about it, whether it touched your life or you learned something new. Don't forget to like this video, therefore, and share it with your friends. And I'll see you again, my dear friends, tomorrow at 9 o'clock. 9 o'clock is with me, Father Warner.